What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be doing a request video from this user MineRaids, who asked, "Hey Dallas, any chance you can make a video on realistic water materials, specifically lakes, still waters like ponds? Almost any water I see tutorial or info on looks fake immediately." He also added that he primarily uses path tracing, so that's what we'll be using. You're actually in luck today, as I'll be sharing the same water shader I used to create the water for Megalopolis, which was also rendered in Unreal Engine using Pathtracer. So without wasting any more time, let's just jump right on in. So as mentioned, we're going to be developing a water shader specifically for path tracing. And it's a really important key distinction to make very early on in developing your project, your environment, whatever it is you might be working on, as Lumen and path tracing are entirely different rendering solutions within Unreal Engine, and they're going to provide entirely different results. So balancing between one or the other, you really want to understand which you're going to be focusing on. As we can see here, for example, we have the water and clearly a scene that's currently running in Lumen. And as we switch to path tracing, we see the water looks entirely different. And so again, understanding whether you're going to be using Lumen or path tracing. What I will say as well is there are a few different shader tricks and such that work in Lumen that don't work in path tracing, and these are things that as of right now just are not really fixed. So again, you're choosing the rendering solution while at the same time sort of picking and choosing your limitation. So whereas path tracing might provide you, more believable reflections, global illuminations, things like that, it is going to limit you in some regards. And so we're going to be talking about some of the workarounds. However, some things, again, at the moment of recording this, aren't necessarily fixed to my knowledge. So one of the key ones being the actual blending. Whereas like with Lumen, for example, we see this nice soft fade between the shore and then to where it gets deeper. And as we go to path tracing, you can see there's just this really hard edge. What I would suggest really, if you're going to be doing something like this and you want to hide this edge, is really just hide it with geometry to the best of your ability. But just wanted to get that out there before we dive in. And so if you're using landscape grass and you're rendering in path tracing, and you go to turn on path tracing and it looks like this, where all your foliage disappears, there's a very simple console command to fix that, which is r.raytracing.geometry.landscapegrass, and then just change this to 1, and then all of your landscape grass will show up now. And I'll have that console command listed in the description down below. So we have a bit to go over, so let's dive straight into this water shader now. So I'm going to make a new material, water _ pt2. Going to open that up. And so for path tracing, there are a few different path trace specific rendering forms, such as thin translucency, thin translucent, that works really well with path tracing, as well as where is it? Using the thin translucent material output. We're not going to be using this. This works really great with glass. However, when using it with something like a body of water, it can really just create a sort of weird kind of flat effect. And so there might be some, better ways of utilizing it. However, the technique that we've always used is just using the tried and true single layer water material. And so that's what we're going to be using. So single layer water. And then we're going to grab our single layer water material output. And we're going to get started. So for scattering, we're going to grab a scalar a multiply, and a vector 3. And then we'll call this deep water color, and we'll give it like a dark blue color. So we'll give it like a dark blue color. So let's go something like, oops. I'm just copying and pasting the one from my previous material that worked. But basically it's just this deep dark blue right here. And then this will be deep water clarity. Plug this, plug that. And we'll give this a value to start of 0.05. Plug that in. And then the absorption, we're going to do the same thing. We'll probably just copy and paste this actually. And then we're just going to name this shallow. So shallow water. Shallow water. And we'll give this one a dark green. Okay, and then this one, we'll give this one a value of, let's say, 2.5. And then we're going to just plug this in. And then another thing you can always do as well is use a hue shift. So take this, plug this into here. Then we could add this, and we'll just call this hue shift. Give it a value of like 0.5. So when looking at this and thinking, well, we have a color vector, and we could easily just change the color here. Why not just do that as opposed to using the hue shift? The reason being is because the actual like value right here really matters, and it can be really finicky. And so if you get a value that works really well for the specific kind of water look you're going for, it might be easier if you want to like change the tonality of it to just hue shift it, just change it by a value as opposed to potentially like messing this up. You don't necessarily have to use the hue shift, and you can just, you know, when in the parameter, you could just change it in here. But then again, you know, like, you can, maybe you want to go back to where you were, you forget it. But anyway, yeah, so hue shift, not to hue shift, that is the question. Next, we're going to add for the phase shift, or phase G. And we're just gonna call this light scatter, and give it a value of, let's say, 0.3. All right, and then color scale behind water. So one thing to consider also, one of the limitations of path tracing is the way in which you would do like caustics, which we're not going to be replicating here. But the way in which you would do it normally when creating a water shader for Lumen doesn't really work with path tracing. It doesn't cast the caustics in that sort of trick way. But we are going to still be able to get some sort of light underneath that water and sort of trick it. And so the way we're going to do that is add a scalar, and we'll call this light offset. And then we're going to plug this into an add. And then we're going to grab what's called an atmosphere sunlight vector, and we're going to mask the blue channel here. Yep. These, by the way, these like sunlight atmosphere, sunlight vector, there's a directional light vector one. Like, these are all very useful nodes. Of course, they're all going to give you specific sort of effects. But I do, you know, suggest playing around with these. Basically what they do is they're going to actually like sample the atmospheric light, the atmospheric effects, and that'll help you give you a much more sort of cohesive look to your shaders. So if you're doing something like a large body of water, fog and stuff like that, things that are actually like incorporated, lived in part of the environment, these are always good sort of nodes to play with, and just see what works. Then here, plug this into a saturate. You could also use clamp. I tend to use saturate just because it just looks neater, looks cleaner, in my opinion. The only time personally I use clamp is if I'm going to clamp it by like -1 to 1 or something like that. But if it's just going to be 0 to 1, I personally just use saturate. And then we're going to take this and plug this into another multiply. So M and then left click. And we'll call this underwater boost value 1. Plug it in. And plug that in. The other thing is we need to just set this up. This is just going to be very simple. So right here, we got base color. Base color, you probably don't even need to put anything, but if you're going to have an opacity that is not 0, then probably should. So we'll just call this base color and just give it some blue, like so. And then specular. For water, I tend to start with a level of 0.5 and then kind of go from there. Roughness. And you leave it at 0. You can put it at 0.1 if you're feeling fancy. There's not really much of a difference. If you, it's just playing around with values, but 0, 0.1, whatever you're feeling. And then the other thing we need to do is this refraction is disabled. So we'll type in refraction and change it to index of refraction. You can also do like pixel normal offset, works pretty well pretty good as well. I'm just going to use index of refraction. And again, some of these, like what you're going to use is oftentimes going to depend on specifically what your goal is for the shader, for the scene. My advice really when you're building shaders, especially if you're using this as a learning opportunity as opposed to like a one-in-one plug and play to get something that looks good. If you're using this to actually learn how to build water shaders, play around with different things, try different values, different types of inputs and see what works. To be honest, that's how I've learned a lot of this stuff, is just what does this do? And plugging it in, it's okay, that works. And then, just over time, you find the buttons that work, and then here we are. From here, we're going to properly spell Fresnel and type it in, plug that into multiply, and I'll call this, IOR. So the actual IOR, index of refraction value for water, is technically 1.333. However, in Unreal Engine, that'll give you a value that doesn't look correct, really. So I usually just do 1.03 and then add a couple 3.3s after that just to feel fancy. Plug that in. There we go. So the magic of the shader is really going to be the normal and actually the emissive color. So a lot of water shaders, probably already look pretty similar to this. Emissive might be something a little bit different, and we'll go over why we do emissive, particularly for path tracing, but it can also give you some interesting looks for Lumen water as well. Lastly, don't forget, is type in opacity, and I'm just going to leave it at 0. Plug that in, hit apply. Cool. Okay, and so here, I'm just going to drag and drop this on here. And then one thing I'm also going to do is bring in a sphere. Now, traditionally, we don't put water shaders on spheres, but I like to do this when I'm developing a water shader, especially if I'm going to be doing it for like path tracing. That's something I did when we were developing the water for the parks in Megalopolis, is using a sphere to sort of see, particularly with Megalopolis, we wanted like some glowing sort of scatter within the water. And it was a lot easier to see it on the sphere as opposed to the water, you know. So utilizing this to sort of make sure that things are working the way you want it to work. And so we're looking at this. So right now we have just a very, you know, still body of water. It's pretty dark. And if you don't want waves or anything, you could maybe even just stop it here. It kind of just looks like dark glass, but we're going to take it to the next level. So move this out of the way. So for the, I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to hit save. All right. So I'm going to make a little bit of room. And then what we're going to do, let's do the normal map first. So for the normal map, what we're going to do is I'm going to grab a texture sample, and then we're going to just type in water_n, and just unless you have a specific, you know, water normal, you know, you can use that. I tend to just use the one that comes with the engine. It works perfectly fine. And then next thing we're going to grab is actually going to be in the engines folder. And if you don't have the engines folder, like if you come over here to all and it doesn't show, you're going to want to just come over here to settings, click on that, and then just make sure that show engine content is checked, and then this folder will appear. I'm going to open this. And I don't know the specific folder. I've never actually just gone through and click till I found it. So I tend to just go in here and just motion until I find motion four-way chaos. If you're using normal maps, like for this specific example, make sure to use the one that says normal as opposed to just, you know, regular four-way chaos. This one is specifically made for normal maps. And you can, there's kind of two ways to do the normals, right? There's this way. There's also the way where you've probably seen where it's like the panner, and then, you know, use like, oops, not a pen, but, you know, use like an append vector, and then, you know, you do like the X speed and the Y speed, and then you combine these like a bunch of times, right? The reason I like to use motion four-way chaos instead of that is because if we actually open up this function, it is already done for us. So all that panner and stuff, it's already there. So we don't have to actually like set this up, which, you know, who wants to spend the time to do that when it's already made? If you can ever save time, like my suggestion is just do it. You know, so anyway, so we're just going to use that. It's motion four-way chaos. Right click this, convert to texture object, plug that into texture 2D. And then for coordinates, you could do either texture coordinate. When it comes to like water stuff, I like to use world align values instead. So I'm going to grab a world position, and then I'm just going to divide that, and we'll call, oops, not add, grab a scalar, and I'll call this L wave scale, so large wave scale, and we'll just give it a number like 1500, let's say. Plug it in, plug that in. If you're wondering, by the way, how I'm doing this, like cleaning things up, if you want things to be sort of lined up like this, if you just select them and just press Q on your keyboard, it'll just line it up There's another one which is Shift A will sort of align things horizontally. So Shift A is aligning like horizontally, and Q is aligning things vertically. Anyway, we're going to take this and we'll call this L wave speed, and the bigger it is, the slower it should be. So we'll go like 0.02. Plug that in. You could do divisor. I tend to just leave it alone and just work with these. And then we're just going to take this, copy it, paste it, and we'll call this M, so medium, and medium, and we'll just like make this, let's just make this like 750, so just cut it in half. And then this one, we'll make this like, let's make this one like 0.25. This one might be a bit too slow, so we'll go like 0.05. Okay, and then one more. And you can use as many or as few of these as you want. I usually just do 3. That's it's usually enough, information. And then here, we're going to drop it down even more. So we'll go like 200. Wait, I need to change the name first. So S for small, and then same for this. This one will make it a bit faster. So let's say like 0.65. And this one will make this like 250. And then here, we're just going to blend angle corrected normals, and just grab this, like so. And then I'm just going to plug this into a flatten normal and just 1 minus. And we'll just call this normal intensity, and I'll put out like a 0.3 right now. Cool. And you could always do like a flat normal for each specific one, and then plug them into the, to blend all the normals. But for the sake of this, I'm just going to keep it simple like this. Me personally, I try to like reduce the amount of sliders whenever possible, which, I mean, sometimes you need a lot, but if you can reduce it, it just keeps things a bit easier, especially if you're working like with a team and other people might be jumping into it. You want to keep things as easy to read as possible. I'm just going to call this wave normals. And then here, I'm going to make this a named reroute and call this normal. The reason being is to just keep things organized, and I'll just comment this and call this wave normals. And just change the color to look cool. And I'll move this stuff out of the way as well. Single layer water. Okay, so here, I'm just going to type in normal to grab that reroute, plug it in, hit apply. Okay. So now if we go into lit, so now we can see the water's moving. One thing you'll notice, by the way, is like when you go into path tracing, you'll notice that like the material will start to smear. When you actually render this out via sequencer, that's going to fix itself. So don't worry too much about like this sort of thing going on. It's just par for the course. The reason being is because path tracing is like a progressive sampler. And so it's trying to like render it over time. And if things are moving, it's just going to become blurry. But again, you render it via sequencer, it's going to fix itself. But as we can see here, things are looking fine. If you want, to see how it looks with, with path tracing, I would just turn the speed down to 0 on everything. So if you want to like judge the normal intensity and all that stuff, so you can go in here and change these, you know, change the speeds, like 0 real quick. 0, 0, 0. And now we can just see the sort of normal intensity that we got going on here with the water. One thing to keep in mind as well, if you're new to like water shaders, is the specular amount is very important for water. So if we turn specular down to like 0, for example, we see we don't have like any information. And then if we turn it up to like 1, it becomes like very shiny. And so when you want to control the sort of like glossiness, roughness of your water, this is actually where you're going to do it, as opposed to like roughness. Roughness, of course, will also sort of, you know, change things a little bit, as we can see here. But specular is where you're really going to be controlling that. So anyway, let's jump back to it. So we got that going. So next is going to be the emissive. And the reason being, or like the reason as to why we're going to add an emissive, is to add a sort of like fake subsurface scattering to the water. So really like a fake absorption in a sense, which might seem kind of weird, right? In the sense that, you know, with Lumen and when we usually create these single layer water materials, you know, that's usually just settled here, right? We sort of change the intensity, we change the color. However, when we do that on our water shader here, it'll kind of do that, but it doesn't give you that same sort of look. It more so creates a sort of like feathering effect as we go here. So for example, if I like, even though I have the hue shift thing, but you know, just here, if I like change the color, it might be kind of subtle right here actually, but this just got like really dark. So we turn this down. So if we turn this to like black, for example, we could see it's like pretty opaque here. And you, again, it's another reason we use like the sphere, you know, so we can see that. And then we change the sort of values here. You know, as we could see here, it's like we could see what it's doing more easily in Lumen, and then when we go to path tracing, it's a bit more difficult. And then even here, you know, we change these values. You know, so again, like path tracing, it can be a bit finicky to work with in creating water shaders. And so to get that sort of scattering, we're actually going to fake that with the emissive. So I'll move this out of the way. All right. And so the way we're going to do this is, let's move all this out of the way, give us some space real quick. All right. So it's all going to start with a vector, and we're going to name this vector light direction. So this can also be used for like you can also input this to like a material parameter collection and have it set up with like a whole wind direction or light direction system if you wanted. And for right now, we're just going to give, let's say green, just a base value of 1. And so this way it's going to be primarily facing the Y direction. So again, you know, R is X axis, green is Y axis, and blue is Z axis. But for here, we're going to pull out here and we're going to add a component mask. We're going to grab 2 actually. And this first one is going to be all of them. So RGB, and this one is just going to be RG. And from here, I'm going to pull this off, and actually we're going to right click and just grab a dot product. And then we're going to grab a pixel normal world space. And then we're going to break float 3. And so the reason we're doing this, actually, let me get to the next step and then I'll explain. So we're going to into a break float 3, and then we're going to a make float 3. The reason we're doing this as opposed to like just plugging this in is because we want to actually invert the blue channel. Otherwise, what's going to happen is like the effect will just be sort of topical as opposed to like underneath. And so on here and just 1 minus to flip that. Plug that into here. And then here, we're going to add a vector. So hold V and left click, and we'll call this SSS, subsurface scattering color, subsurface color, whatever you want to call it. And we're just going to make this like some sort of aqua type color like that. Then we're going to multiply. And we'll call this SSS intensity. Just give a value of like 20, 25, something like that. And then this, we're going to lerp this, and then A, we're going to give it a value of 0.5, like so. All right, so I'll clean this up a little bit. All right, and then this one, we're going to grab this. We're going to plug this into an append vector. And then this will be light mask verticality. And let's go value of like -0.5. And then we're going to plug this into another vertex normal world space, plug that into absolute, or whoops, sorry, into an add. And then plug this into another dot product with a camera vector. A camera vector so we can control it in conjunction with the actual camera. And then we're going to grab a power node like so. Another scalar, and this will be the light mask radius. And just give it a value of like, I don't know, 10. And then plug that into a multiply by a Fresnel. Oops. Wrong one. Copy paste. Fresnel. And then this is near camera fade. And we'll get a value of like 0.5. So these values are we're probably gonna want to like adjust them after the fact, which is always fine. Like I always encourage exploration and, you know, just playing with the numbers and seeing what's doing what specifically, and yeah, and then going from there. So anyway, we're gonna take this and plug this into another saturate, and we're just going to lerp alpha, and then plug this into a clamp. And now the reason we're using clamp is because instead of using a value of 0 to 1, it's going to be 0.5 to 1. Or actually, no, let's leave that as a saturate. And then we're basically done here. So this is one way to do it, and the other way to do it is a little bit more simply, but with a little bit less control, which is to just use a sky atmosphere light direction and plug that into another dot product with a vertex normal world space, and then multiply this by this, and we'll use a static switch parameter and use atmospheric light direction SSS true and false. So this is for if you want to actually use the sky atmosphere, the light direction. If you don't, then you can just do it, manually or with your own sort of solution. Again, using like a material parameter collection, for example, you can have it drive that, or if you're just using sky atmosphere, you can have it drive that. And then from here, I'm going to also, just for the sake of organization, emissive, and just plug this into another named reroute, call it emissive. There we go. Hit apply. So one thing we did wrong actually is this this lerp right here is we want it. I set it at 0.5, but we want it to be 0. Okay, there we go. Cool. And so here we can either use the light direction or we could use the atmosphere skylight direction. And then from here we could really just play with the different values to try to get a look that works. And so with this, it's actually going to be like, if you're using this, you're going to want to do the light direction and like change this to sort of tone it down. And this is an effect that this is something you want to just be very subtle, like a 0.02 would work, perfectly fine. And what that's doing, if it's coming across through the recording, is at the little crest of the waves right here, and you probably see it better on your end, but on the little crests of the waves right here, you get this sort of slight color differentiation. It looks almost like a subsurface scattering type effect, like light's absorbing on it. This looks particularly well on like 3D water, like if you have like an alembic type water effect that you brought in to render an Unreal Engine, which if you're doing path tracing, that's probably the way you want to go anyway, with exception to like a lake. But the effect works really well. And yeah, as you can see, like initially it starts off like very strong. And so just toning that down a little bit can really help. But I like to keep it pretty high as I'm sort of tuning in the masking of this and sort of how I want it. And you can always tone it down with the subsurface intensity as well. What I find though is the subsurface intensity, like the light direction when you turn this down, it sort of like gives it kind of a softer look. So it kind of depends how you want it, how you want to go about it. But yeah, I tend to keep subsurface at a higher level to make it more like uniform, and then I bring down the light direction. And you don't have to keep it at just green. So again, this is part of the exploration of it all. So you could change it to X. You could try, blue. So blue is going to be like underneath, which kind of like I guess the closest thing to a fake caustics for path tracing. And you can, you can kind of combine these. So, 0.02, for example. Water is a tricky thing within a game engine, and with the advent of path tracing, even more so, as it adds another layer of consideration and complexities. Now, thank you all for tuning in. I really enjoy reading through the comments and talking with you all, as well as taking the requests. Now, I've been working in the education space for a while now at places such as Lumen and CG Pro, and this channel is a way for me to reach out and give back to community, which has been such great help to me. Now I'll continue to strive to create great content for you all, so if there's any other subject matters you wish to discuss or learn about, please just let me know in the comments down below. I'll also be working on launching a Discord here soon, so stay tuned for that too. Until then, I'll see you guys next time.